I welcome you all to this August seminar. Which is being held to commence the birth centenary of Comrade Asis. Comrade Asis is one of the tallest leaders of the bank employees movement and broader democratic movement as well. Now, he was born on 1st November 1922. That marks that today we have entered the 100th year of Comrade Asis. Now, Comrade Asis was associated with freedom movement also. He was connected with People Defense Movement, that is Janarokha Committee, from 1942 to 1946. Now, during his service period, he was the founder president of All India Regional Rural Bank Employees Association, the Association of the Employees and Officers of Regional Rural Banks. He has been the General Secretary of All India Reserve Bank Employees Association from 1968 to 1990. Now, he was elected as the General Secretary of Bank Employees Federation of India in his foundation conference in 1982 and was elected in the consecutive 3 subsequent conferences till 1994. In 1999 Kochi conference, he was elected the president from his 5th conference, and he was advisor from the 6th and 7th conference in 2003 and 2007 in Kolkata and Hyderabad respectively. Now, he was also joint secretary of the Bengal Provincial Bank Employees Association from 1954 to 1958. He was a member of the General Council of All India Bank Employees Association from 1953 to 1958. He was a secretary of Reserve Bank Employees Association, Kolkata from 1949 to 1955. And he was elected in the Rajya Sabha in April 1988. He was also arrested and imprisoned for trade union activities in 1956. He plays very important role in the sports club and library of Reserve Bank of India also. So this has been the versatility of Comrade Asis, pioneers of the bank employees movement in our country. Now, Bank Employees Federation of India has decided to observe the birth centenary during the whole year through different programs, which is being commenced by this webinar today. We all know that the country has been put into restrictions for the last 1.5 years due to the pandemic of COVID-19. Now, with gradual relaxation, we will try to meet physically, of course, in different units and affiliates. We have already advised all concerned to observe the centenary befittingly, as because we all know that Comrade Asis joined the industry when there was no codified service conditions, when the total banking sector was under privatization. All private corporates were the owners of these banks. And during his whole career, primarily, he fought for the nationalization of the banking industry. Secondly, for a codified service conditions, and we started from 1966 by signing the first bipartite settlement. So we are meeting at a time when the Damocles sword is on the public sector banking of the country. Government has already announced that they are going to privatize public sector banks. And it is not only the banks. All the sectors of the financial sectors are under attack. Insurance sector is under attack. And not only public sector banks, the regional rural banks are also under attack of the government. They have already decided for reorganize and restructure the regional rural banks, which will fail the very establishment of the RRB sector. The government is also attacking the cooperative banking sector. On one hand, they are trying to corporatize the cooperative banking sector, and on the other hand, they are creating disturbances for the federal structure of the country also, so far as the cooperative banking sector is concerned. RBI, NABARD, every other private sector banks, every other sectors are under attack now. So it is imperative task for the bank employees movement of today that whatever rights and privileges that has been achieved through the struggle of the bank employees movement under the leadership of Comrade Asis and likes, we have to maintain the public sector character of the banking industry. Not only that, we have to combat the offensives that are being launched on us. We are very glad and thankful to the leaders like Comrade Somir Ghosh, General Secretary of All India Reserve Bank Employees Association, Comrade S. Venkateswar Reddy, the Secretary General of the All India Regional Rural Bank Employees Association, and our beloved Vice President, Comrade Pradeep Biswas, who has kindly consented to address today's webinar on this very important subject, that is present scenario of the banking industry, to commence the birth centenary of Comrade Asis. Today's webinar will be conducted by our President, Comrade C. Janda Kumar. So I request Comrade C. Janda Kumar to take charge and coordinate today's webinar. Thank you, comrades.
Comrades, as explained by our General Secretary, today we are here on a special occasion to commemorate the birth centenary of an unforgettable name in the bank employees movement. Comrade Ashis has led the movement on all the major segments of the banking industry: the central bank, the rural bank, and the commercial bank. He was not merely a leader of the bank employees, he was very much part of the working class movement of this country. His contributions, his footprints, and the legacy he left behind will be definitely a great learning book for the present and future generations of bank employees. Today we have amongst us the leaders from all the three segments. In addition to that, I have seen from the participants list that Comrade K. Venugopal, the ex-General Secretary of AIEA, is also attending this program. I extend my welcome to Comrade Venugopal also. Without any other statement, I directly invite Comrade Samir Ghosh to start his presentation. Comrade Samir Ghosh, please. Samir Ghosh
India.
has to.
Can you hear
Hello.
me?
Okay, now it's okay. Now it's okay.
Okay. He was the founder General Secretary of Bank Employees Federation of India. He was the president of All India Regional Rural Bank Employees Association for quite a long time. And for Reserve Bank employees, he was the framer of their movement, their perceptions, their thinking, and whose gratitude to Comrade Sen knows no bound. So it is quite appropriate that his birth centenary is being observed befittingly with a year-long program. And today's webinar is the beginning of this year-long observance, and I am indeed elated and honored that I have been given an opportunity to take part in the webinar in commemoration of Comrade Sen's memory. The subject of today's discussion is quite appropriately present scenario of the banking industry. For Comrade Sen is the forerunner of bank employees trade union movement, has been associated with the bank employees trade union movement as a part of the general democratic and working class movement of the country. And from 1944 onwards, when he joined the Kolkata office of Reserve Bank of India, till his demise on 24th August 2007, for these long 6 decades, Comrade Sen not only played the role of an organizer and leader of bank employees and elsewhere, but a think tank and guide as well. Also, 2 other outstanding mentors and organizers, along with them, Comrade Naresh Pal and Sudhin Biswas, popularly known as Montu Biswas. He was one of the leading triad of bank employees movement. Besides, Comrade Prabhatkar, Comrade H.L. Parwana were other 2 outstanding leaders of bank employees. And so also Comrade Mohanlal Majumdar, the leader of state bank employees. They are the pioneers who will be ever remembered. And I salute them, and along with all of you, we salute them. Incidentally, the year of his birth, Comrade Sen's birth, 1921, coincides with the formation of trade union in Reserve Bank. Of course, then it was not Reserve Bank of India, as Reserve Bank was set up in the year 1935 under the RBI Act of 1934. But before that, in British India, the management of currency system, to look after that, there was a body called Currency Corporation. And the employees of the Currency Corporation, they formed a union in Calcutta on 17th February 1922. And that is named Currency Association Calcutta. This Currency Association transformed itself into Reserve Bank Employees Association after the work of Currency Corporation was taken over by the newly constituted Reserve Bank of India. Reserve Bank Employees Association Kolkata have also decided to commemorate both Comrade Sen's birth centenary as well as the centenary of their association in 2022 with due solemnity and mobilization. Incidentally, Reserve Bank Employees Association is one of the oldest trade unions in the country. Only I2C being formed in 1920, and the Union of State Bank Employees, then named as Imperial Bank, they were formed 2 years earlier to that. Comrade Sen's maternal uncle, Bhupati Majumdar, was a well-known freedom fighter of the then period. He was the leader of a district unit of Indian National Congress. His residence was a hub of political activity where freedom fighters used to assemble. Young Ashis used to go to maternal uncle's house off and on and came in contact with those selfless, dedicated people. This perhaps created in his mind a deep impression about freedom of the country and aversion to foreign rule. During his college days, in early 40s, Calcutta was at the top almost of anti-British, anti-imperialist struggles. In those tumultuous days, workers and students also participated in large number. Comrade Sen was imbued with the perception of freedom struggle and also formed a clear idea that one must protest and fight against injustice. Anyway, he got himself associated with the ongoing people's movement. It is learned, reliably learned, that he was an associate of the office of the Kisan Sabha in Kolkata, for which he worked as a voluntary courier of confidential letters and notes, etc., when he was a student in a college. So he joined RBI in 1944. And as I told you, that RBI, there was a union formed in 1922, but that was a placid, inert, and only acted as a petitioning body. That was the picture of so-called middle class trade union during that time. Though in contrast to that, working class movement and organizations were vibrant, militant, and conscious. Comrade Sen, with few of his colleagues with same ideas and perceptions, he tried to change slowly but subtly the attitude of the association to employees' problems and issues, tried to remove the fierce psychosis from the minds of the employees and their leaders as well, and tried to change the yes sir approach of the then union leadership. That was, however, a strenuous effort. Comrade Ashis did not falter, however. He pursued, along with his few peers, in 1949. In 1949, as Comrade Devashish Vasu Chaudhary was saying, that he became the Secretary of Reserve Bank Employees Association, Calcutta, and a new episode began. By the time AIBA was formed in late 40s of the last century, Comrade Sen associated himself with the primary days of AIBA. He tried to integrate RBI employees with the struggles around in other banks, in other spheres. Banks, which were the intermediaries between depositors and borrowers, started being formed gradually. But excepting State Bank of India, which was so named after the Imperial Bank of India, became nationalized in 1955. All banks were in private hands. There was chaos and randomness. Many banks were formed. They collected deposits from poor men and then vanished in a trice. This happened off and on. On the other hand, as per report from 1947 to 1969, during these 22 years, about 560 private banks turned turtle. On the other hand, big banks run by big corporate, big industrialists and zamindars would not lend money to all, but only to their own concerns, to their group companies. They then flourished at the expense of others in the same production chain. Bankers' industrial nexus developed, creating an unequal competition. In rural India was mostly unbanked. Moneylenders, sahukars, zamindars, they used to rule the roost. Even capitalist development, with the Indian rulers tried their best, was being stalled. In the 60s, there was a political crisis. The behemoth of then ruling Indian National Congress was crumbling. It faced challenges both within and without. People's movement burst forth. The Indian National Congress was sharply divided and was being disintegrated. And it was a common demand. So many demands came to the fore. And amongst the popular demands, the demand of nationalization of banks was a very important one. It was a common demand for people, for their monetary safety, as well as cheap loans for consumption, essential needs like housing, education, small-scale industries and establishments, which the old-style private banks could not cater to, or rather would not cater. Agriculture was suffering as banks would not lend to farmers, agriculturists. They also did not have the spirit, so to nationalize banks and bring them under government ownership with appropriate regulations and emphasis on priority sectors, agriculture, etc., became a strident demand nationwide. And as Comrade Devashish was saying, that there was no service code of the bank employees. So it was also a demand of the bank employees from within the banks that a service code has to be formed, has to be set up, and accordingly some rules have to be there in employer-employee relationship. 14 big banks were nationalized under the impact of this movement in 1969, taken over from private tycoons to state ownership and monitoring. This also helped the apparently progressive faction of the ruling class, of the disintegrated ruling party, getting a public image, better public image, which helped it enormously in the hustings. That we all know, they is a part of the history. With nationalization, banking sector advanced by leaps and bounds. It grew in spread, coverage, deposits, loans, helped regional and sectoral advancement at all. The rural sector benefited the most. India overcame its perennial food shortage, gaining in food sufficiency. The humiliation that the nation suffered long of surviving from ship to mouth by begging wheat under American PL 480 was done away with by the impact of banks, nationalized banks giving quite a good amount of credit to agriculture and related sectors. Today, when there is an orchestrated cry against public sector banks, the champions of bank privatization forget that scenario of yesteryears, when a politically free India gained freedom from periodic famine more than 2 decades after 1947, when we got political freedom, and when the Indian tricolor was first unfurled, and the first Prime Minister of the country, Jawaharlal Nehru, delivered his famous Tries to Destiny approach speech. After nationalization, banks spread far and wide. Branches increased manifold. Vast areas of rural India came under banking coverage. This got a boost by formation of Gramina banks in mid-70s, which did splendid work in the rural sector. Deposits were mobilized, public sector banks, advances to private sectors increased substantially. Loans flew to big industries also. Consortium of public sector banks also pulled up their resources to make huge credits available to big industries, big projects which helped industrialization of India. Banks are considered to be the barometers of the country's economy. The ups and downs of a country's economy first gets reflected in the banking system. With gradual liberalization of Indian economy from the 80s, with policies of privatization and globalization being followed with increasing emphasis from 1990 onwards, Indian banking sector also opened their paths for corporate India. There was pressure from the government on public sector banks to relax rules in giving loans. Also, nexus developed with corporates, government machinery, and banks' top echelons. Management and recovery of loans suffered heavily, but those were camouflaged, unfortunately. Evergreening of loans became the order of the day. Bank unions and their members protested and fought, but theirs was a cry in their wilderness, unfortunately. Hence, the inevitable happened. Loans were not being repaid. Banks' non-performing assets mounted enormously. Under strident criticism and public pressure, RBI had to introduce asset quality review of banks in early 2010. Skeletons started tumbling one after the another from banks' cupboards. The gross NPAs mounted to 10 to 11 lakh crores of rupees, a humongous amount beyond the capacity of the banking system to bear. Indian banks were veritably facing a real uncontrollable disaster. It was revealed that large portion of the unpaid loans belong to willful defaulters, who are actually who is who of Indian corporate world. As per Financial Stability Report, July 2021, the large borrowers accounted for a share of 77.9% of the total gross NPAs. They could very well repay, but did not, taking banks' money as their own money. Government was unwilling to force them. They were actually in cahoot, government and these willful defaulters. Government and RBI introduced Insolvency and Bankruptcy Code, IBC, and National Company Law Tribunals to recover defaulted money. That was done with much fanfare as a panacea of NPA problem, but it has been a fiasco. Cases of default put forth lingered and remained pending for long. Hardly a few cases have been settled. For those of the defaulted amount, hardly 15 to 20% were recovered, and about 80 to 85% were wiped out, which were called jokingly haircuts. Banks lost very heavily. As per Business Standard of 21st July 2021, public sector banks have written off a massive rupees 8 lakh crores of loans during the last 7 years of Narendra Modi government. The defaulters which bled the banks white got scot-free and are eagerly waiting with money looted for the banks for the beleaguered banks to be sold to them. Government and their paid experts have started talking about privatization of public sector banks as a solution. After 50 years of bank nationalization, privatization again. It is not the solution, it is rather a recipe for disaster. If the private banks are so efficient, why since 1970, after the banks were nationalized, as many as 23 private banks shut their doors and had to be merged with public sector banks? From Global Trust Bank, Times Bank, Bank of Rajasthan, Centenary Bank to latest Yes Bank. These are the long story. The much talked about ICICI Bank and its chairperson Chandra Kochhar have been mired into enormous financial scandal. I am not going into details of the private banks, as these are all well known. Interestingly, the promoters of some of these banks got Best Banker of the Year award with their pictures flashed in the cover of many journals and periodicals. The money tycoons, both indigenous and foreign, are eagerly waiting for banks with huge public deposits of more than 90,000 crores of rupees to fall in their laps. And to oblige them, the government is gearing to formally bring legislation for privatization of 2 public sector banks in the coming winter session of the parliament. It has been announced. That will be the beginning. After that will come torrents. Already several public sector banks have been merged to create mega banks. Those will be the easy targets of global money, and the government will be too willing to sell them. We are quite aware that a few years back, a big guy of the government of the USA came to India to parley with his counterpart to plead for privatization of State Bank of India at least. That is now well known. Banking industry in India is surely heading for a disaster if it cannot be prevented by a massive people's movement. It is also to be noted that excepting the government-sponsored economies, none supports the move of privatization. Just day before yesterday, the former chairman of State Bank of India, Sri Rajneesh Kumar, a veteran banker, strongly deprecated the move to privatize public sector banks. Former governors of RBI, Dr. C. Rangarajan, Dr. Y.V. Reddy, Dr. D. Subbarao, Dr. Raghuram Rajan, have either opposed or expressed strong reservation against privatization of banks. Ex-RBI Governor Dr. Bimal Jalan also said that the PSBs are extremely important from the country's point of view, as they are the ones who have expanded to rural and semi-urban areas and into the agricultural sector, where the largest section of Indians are employed. I may cite a personal experience where I was a privy to a discussion. A few years back, in a small conclave organized by Institute of Development Studies, ISDK Kolkata, under the auspices of well-known economist Professor Amiyo Bakchi, Dr. Y.V. Reddy, former RBI governor, who also became the chairman of the 13th Planning Commission later, on being asked his opinion about private banks, said very categorically that RBI do not find itself comfortable with big private sector banks, as RBI finds it difficult to make them abide by banking rules and regulations. With their enormous clout on the government machinery and money power, they flout regulatory norms at random, which is generally not the case with public sector banks. What is said, not that PSBs do not err at times, but they do not do it willingly. That is what Dr. Y.V. Reddy said very candidly, openly. This observation, Dr. Reddy, a retired central banker who had first-hand knowledge of banking regulations, very important. We have also seen how in 2008, the US Central Bank, US Fed, was a helpless spectator when big private US banks widely flouted lending norms and manipulated mortgage bonds to create the largest global meltdown so far, when billions of dollars of small depositors and small investors just vanished into thin air. And that will be the fate of Reserve Bank of India also, if banks are indeed privatized, what the government of India they are trying to do. In this connection, against votaries of privatization, we firmly hold that efficiency is ownership neutral. It is not that private banks are acme of efficiency and performance. Neither is it contrary for public sector banks. PSBs can function with highest level of efficiency if freed from undue political interference and various other constraints. Need of the hour is therefore give PSBs operational freedom with ownership being in government hands so that PSB earnings, profit, etc. can be deployed for national cause. Bank privatization is to be resisted at all costs. Bank unions will have to take initiative. They're already in the field. However, this issue does not relate to bank employees alone. It is a national issue of the people, entire democratic forces. They have to enter into the arena. It is indeed very welcome that on this issue, all constituents of the United Forum of Bank Unions have unified opinion, irrespective of their political orientations. Gatherings and mobilization of not only bank employees and officers, but local people, banks, depositors, customers included, should be programmed to meet people's representatives. Members of parliament in particular, urging on them to oppose this bill of bank privatization on the floor of the parliament, lest they might lose the votes of common citizens, seniors, small entrepreneurs, farmers, etc. of their constituencies. State legislators also should be approached in all states, requesting them to adopt resolution opposing bank privatization. Lakhs of leaflets, rather millions of leaflets in lucid local language, giving true state of affairs, be distributed over the counters in all bank branches all over the country by 1 million bank employees and officers, members of all constituents of UFBU. This will definitely create a very deep impact. These, along with strikes and big gatherings in small and all big banking centers, will be a formidable challenge before the government of India and advocates of bank privatization, the looters of banks' money, the corporate swindlers. Many young comrades, the bright, highly qualified, computer-savvy young boys and girls have joined banks nationwide from 2010 onwards. They owe their recruitment in banks to sustain efforts and agitations by bank unions. They should also understand that, perhaps they do. Bank privatization will put their jobs at risk. Private banks will not bother about creating job opportunities. That is very clear. But they will try to maximize their profits at the cost of both staff and clientele. The policies of hire and fire, unseemly cutthroat competitions among the staff, disrupting their unity, will be the pattern in the days to come. It is they who run the highest risk. In the ensuing struggles, they should therefore not only come forward, but should take the lead. Let the examples of our pioneers like Comrade Ashis and Comrade Pal galvanize us into action for a worthy national and patriotic cause at the time when the nation is going through a deep fundamental crisis. But let us have the confidence that hum honge kamyab. Thank you.
Thank you, Comrade Somer Ghosh. In his very marathon speech, he narrated the history of the development of the banking industry, pre-nationalization period, nationalization period, and the present scenario. And he has also cautioned, unless there is a people's movement to restrain the government from the privatization of the bank, a disaster is awaiting the banking industry. So thank you, Comrade Samir Ghosh, once again. Now we will hear Comrade Venkateshwar Reddy, General Secretary of All India Regional Rural Bank Employees Association. In that sector also, Comrade Ashis has played his due role in organizing and also in achieving service conditions for the RRB employees. Comrade Venkateshwar Reddy, please.
Yeah. Good evening to all participants, and I really appreciate, happy that this centenary celebration is being celebrated through a webinar due to the COVID circumstances. earlier years, we were celebrating Ashis Sen's birth year almost 4 5 times in Hyderabad. And today, though it was almost out of my notice or short notice, we are in Delhi, myself and Comrade Said Khan, exactly the relevant to Ashis Sen's perception to safeguard the interests of the regional rural banks. We are here in Delhi and we rushed back to the lodge to participate in this program, not to miss this one. Today, as Samir Ghoshji has already explained, the Ashis Sen's role in the overall banking movement and his role in freedom struggle, his role in Reserve Bank, in banking industry and regional rural banks. Restricting myself to the regional rural banks, as we all know, after the nationalization of the banks, the RRBs was the nationalization of the banks. There was a need. There was a very much a requirement in the rural areas to expand the banking, but then the government felt the banking commercial banks are reluctant or not effectively entering into rural areas, and they wanted a specialized instrument exclusively to cater to the rural areas, and thus the rural banks have come into existence. Without any service condition, without any recruitment rules, or without any minimum basic service rules or service rights to the employees on ad hoc basis. The institutions have come with good objective, but the employees have did not have any scale or rule or condition. In such circumstances, Comrade Dilip Mukherjee, you all know, because he took initiative with the available, whoever were available, the scattered RRBs were scattered all over the country without any organization and without any understanding of the employees' issues. In such a scenario, Dilip Mukherjee took lead and they have thought of forming an All India organization, that is All India Regional Rural Bank Employees Association, the oldest body of RRB employees themselves. And even today, it is on the RRB's employees themselves are running the organization. So in their first conference at Bhubaneswar, they thought some expert, some experienced trade unionists from banking industry will be a better guide for the RRBs also to guide us and to take forward. So in such circumstances, that Ashis Sen's name has come, who was very popular in Reserve Bank for by that time. And perhaps as far as I know, without the consent of the assistant, the Bhubaneswar, the first conference of ARRBA, took a decision that if the assistant will be the most right and appropriate person to guide the regional rural bank movement, to understand the issues and to also take forward our movement. And without his consent, he has been, the body has, our general body has selected the name of Ashis Sen, and later Comrade Dilip Mukherjee went to him and explained him that entire house was selected. You proposed you to guide us and be the president of our organization. He was surprised because regional rural banks, he was not expecting. He was in RBI and he was concentrating on that movement. So then, but when we said the objectives of RRB Act and the situation, the pathetic position of the employees serving there, and the mismatch between the great objectives of the banks and the worst service conditions of the employees, he immediately accepted to be the president of the association and guide us, not like an honorary president or outside president. He involved himself all through and guided us. He used to participate in all the meetings, not only general bodies or anything, even my central committee meetings, committee meetings, or the workshops. He himself has been a teacher in one of the trade union classes of our RRB leaders. So that way, he himself involved and all through, he was guiding us. And his perception was that RRBs were established with a great objective to take the banking service to the rural people, downtrodden. And this is the need, this is the national cause, and to make them more successful and more meaningful. the employees working in such organizations should be not deprived of any legitimate benefit or not be discriminated with the banking industry. And in that, in the perspective, he was interested in the RRB movement. He participated in our dharnas. He participated in our during the National Industrial Tribunal Award days. He was one of the witnesses before the tribunal also. So that way, not just as an ordinary outside president or honorary president, he day in and day out of the activities he used to guide Dada and guide all of us. And he has been an inspiration all through for all our senior leadership. So everywhere. So even today, 100th year, but 2007 he left us. But till today, we feel that he is amidst us and is guiding force before us. And fortunately for us, after that tribunal long battle of parity scales with the commercial banks, that tribunal has come, tribunal award has been implemented, tribunal award is given in our favor. Is gigantic figure. By that time, he was a Rajya Sabha member and was also a member on the finance committee, parliamentary standing committee on finance. So it was really helpful for us. It has helped us immensely because of his Rajya Sabha membership and also being the member on the parliamentary standing committee. And before the tribunal also, his presence as a witness definitely has influenced upon even the chairman of the tribunal, that Justice S. Sobul Reddy, because of his personality, his nobility, his humility, with which he has presented the situation of the RRB employees and their right entitlement for the parity with commercial banks. So undoubtedly, since I was also in the tribunal those days, the Ashis figure has definitely to the great extent has influenced upon the judge in his coming to his right decision also. And later, for award has come, but for implementation of award also. Because of definitely, undoubtedly, the movement and struggle that is always there, RRB struggle, but coupled with that is guidance and his his involvement for the implementation of that award. During that period, Madhu Dandavati was the finance minister and very closely associated with our Ashis Dada. So that his access and closeness with Madhu Dandavati has also helped us immensely. And he being the member on the parliamentary committee and standing committee on finance, so he also pursued the other MPs and finance minister and seen that that award has been accepted by, in principle acceptance has been done by Madhu Dandavati. Of course, the subsequent order has come after the Yashwant Sinha became the minister, finance minister, but in principle it was accepted by Madhu Dandavati. And it because of his association, our assistance, greater influence and persuasion. We pretty well today remember as a Rajya Sabha member, he was staying in the VP house 421 and later some 321, quarter number also we cannot forget. So he used to go by walk to the parliament as a Rajya Sabha member, and he used to carry the files like a student. He used to read all the whatever that documents or questions, answers, special mentions coming to him day to day. And like a student, like a researcher, he used to study, participate, involve himself in the proceedings. And he is a great personality to all of us to emulate, not only as a trade union leader, as an individual, as a personality, as a human being. We all know he has lived a great life, a noble life, and an end of life also. It is worth mentioning. He actually gave his body. His body also he has given in writing that it should be donated to a hospital for research purpose. So such is in death also. He served a social purpose, social cause, and he definitely for the RRB's movement, Regional Rural Bank movement, he always has been a guiding force and a spirit behind all of us. Today we are struggling for to fulfill his aims and goals, that RRB should be strengthened. Is all through his life and all our meetings, seminars, he was emphasizing. There were many times there were threats by some other organizations that RRB should be merged with sponsor banks. Their only aim was to finish up the regional rural banks, to close the wind up their RRB system. Merge with sponsor bank is winding up the RRB system. that we strongly, it is the only organization here that in RRBs, ARRBA under the vision of the assistant, we always argued, demanded, fought for the separate structure and it's a national rural bank structure, formation of all India structure by name National Rural Bank, and also for strengthening the rural credit system. So he has imbibed in us the value of not only fighting for the welfare of the employees, but also for the welfare of the customers, vast majority of the customers who are depending on RRBs, regional rural banks. So together, that RRB survival and strengthening and simultaneously with the RRB employees welfare, we made a balance and fought, and we have come to this extent today. Now RRBs are an inseparable part of the banking, and but they cannot be now. There cannot be any rural banking without the mention of RRBs in the country. So, but there is a threat. Just now, as Comrade Samir Ghoshji is telling, entire banking is under threat, and RRB has come reach to the RRBs also. So for the last 1.5 years, taking advantage of this COVID, government has moved and formed an expert committee to look into reorganization of RRBs also. Reorganization or restructuring, any study by the present policy holder, by the government and rulers is that towards the privatization. Any policy of the government on public sector today means privatization or shirking their responsibilities or accountability to the common people and public of the country. So that way RRBs also, now they are, as we understand their idea, their plan, so far it is at the highest level. Maybe it will be put forward before cabinet committee or finance minister. It will be moving there in the highest level. The whole idea is to divide the RRBs. Now presently there are 43 RRBs in the country, catering to 40 crore customer, and 21,500 branches are there. So such a massive good structure. Our argument is that all of them have to be integrated to form National Rural Bank and dealing from the sponsor bank. There is no need of any sponsor bank management now. 45 years is over. Banks can stand on themselves and compete with other banks, but not considering these realities and factors, they are going forward to give more powers to sponsor bank and more transfer of more capital, that share of the RRBs, more share, the government of India's share also, they are planning to transfer to the sponsor bank. This is disastrous and counterproductive to the very objectives of the RRBs. So all through we have been pursuing. We had programs before RRBs, and Delhi also last month we had a Dharna, 10th of the September and 27th All India strike we have gone, All India Regional Rural Bank Employees Association. The other organizations all clubbed together, all joined together hands to again demand that merger with sponsor bank means winding up RRB system. But only RRB, ARRBA is now going on the lines of assistance dreams to make them strong, viable and a national level bank. But governments, we are last 6 months, we are opposing, we are moving various political parties, MPs, and we are on the struggle path also to safeguard the rural banking system in the name of let them be National Rural Bank, and let the sponsor banks be dealing from these RRBs. Let the autonomy of the RRBs be protected. Let the autonomy and authority of the RRB boards be respected. That way we can make them more viable and vibrant. That is our stand. But government is proposing to divide the RRB system. Divide and rule is the British legacy that is government is following. So the most profit making banks, 16 banks are there. The government don't want, they want the RRB, these are profit making RRBs to go to public issue, privatization. And the second category, they are in middle way between not in huge reserves or profits or not in losses. To them, the some support will be given, cash, the capital support, but within 3 years, they have to be able to go to public issue. That is, after 3 years, they have to, the slow process of privatization will start. And the C category is Northeast 7 Grameen banks and 2 in Kashmir. These 9 banks, they cannot be immediate, they're sensitive because of their regional location, their geographical location. So their government has not spoken anything. Government may continue for some time. But altogether, the whole idea is to privatize even in the rural banking sector. As just now our previous speakers have said, and taking back the rural bank to the rural areas, rural farmers to the pre-independence or pre-nationalization days or pre-RRB days. That too, leave them to again the private money lenders, or they want to encourage banking correspondence, banking facilitators, or MFIs, microfinance institutions. All these are the neo models of the money lenders. Earlier money lenders, Shaukars. In a organized, they are organized looters. Money lenders earlier were the unorganized, but these are more dangerous than the private money lenders those days. So without humanity or anything. So that way they want to take back to the pre-independence or pre-nationalization days. The counter product against the national interest. This is the Azadi Amrit Utsav, the 75 years of independence. What celebration? Celebration means something good should go to the people. People should be benefited. That is the celebration. And depriving the people of some benefit, banking service or rural or credit service, is it the Utsav or is the Amrit? Nothing. So telling something and doing something, we all have to be together. As our Comrade Samish also told that banks, not only rural banks, cooperative banks, or the commercial bank, every bank, Reserve Bank, NABARD, everybody is under the threat and attack of the new policies, new liberal policies of the government that is taking away the banking again to the back olden days. So together we all have to fight and to imbibe again and again. We have to remember, recall the services and aims, goals of Ashis to gain more spirit and take forward our movement. So the alternative left before the trade union movement is again and again pursue and fight. That today in the banking region, that's what we have done with the joint secretary, with the deputy secretary, under secretary. We are again and again pursuing our aim, opposition to that privatization effort or categorization efforts or the public issue efforts. So that is what the path laid by him, and we have to go forward. So with this, again, I thank the organizers for this conducting the webinar in a right occasion. And again, I pay our rich tributes to the memory of Ashis Dada. Thank you.